speak to you. Good afternoon, members of the Air Pollution Control Board and stakeholders gathered here today. My name is Floyd Miles. I'm chairman of the Board of Supervisors for Charles City County, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the Chickahominy Power Station. One of the things that I was cautioning my colleague about is that we are unique. We only have 3 members on our board. So if 2 of us started talking county business or whatever, we're in a legal meeting, and I didn't want that to happen. So that's why I told Ms. Cody, you go ahead up there. I already got my prepared remarks that I want to make. Charles City County is a rural community which over the years have struggled with economic development and employment opportunities for its residents. Members of the Board of Supervisors began discussing this project in May of 2015, and we've had a great working relationship with the leadership and staff of Balico, which will own and operate the facility. We still believe, if approved, this project will generate tax revenues that fund important infrastructure that our constituents rely heavily on, as well as providing good paying jobs. Our board has attended public comment period, as well as offered our constituents the opportunity to address any concerns related to this project. I will digress for a few seconds. My computer was going off the chain last night and the night before. And one of the things that my colleagues will tell you that I really stress the importance of people showing respect. Some of the comments that were sent to me on my computer, I was so tempted to respond and hit send, but I wouldn't do it because I didn't want to lower myself to the category, people attacking your integrity and stuff like that. There is no place for it. And I just wanted to let y'all know those are some of the things that are happening. I believe it's happening because earlier this week we had a negative media article that the citizens of our county expressed deep concern on regarding the project and the health ramifications surrounding the emissions from this plant. My board members and I have expressed to our constituents that on several occasions the board approved special use permits for the power plant, and we provided DEQ with the certification that a proposed plant will comply with all the applicable local ordinance and zoning requirements. People are saying you did a poor job of letting me know what was going on. Well, we've been doing it since 2015. I tell people you share some responsibility of finding out what's going on as well as I do as a member of the board. We also made them aware that DEQ found that if the facility is constructed and operating in accordance with the conditions of the draft permit, it will comply with all applicable air quality regulations and pose no harm to our citizens. In closing, like I said, over the last 72 hours, environmental groups from across the Commonwealth have brought their concerns to the constituents via 2 community meetings. As a result of these meetings, the constituents are asking that your board delay their vote on the air permit for the Chickahominy Power Station in order to give them more time to address their concern. I and my board are in full support of this travel plan. I heard some of the questions asked about what about the African American community. Well, if you look at me real good, you see I'm African American, and I got a saying that my daddy taught me. He said, "Somebody pull a frog that don't look out for his own pond." Thank y'all.
And I too was a recipient of some of those hysterical emails. One of them said that DEQ and David Taylor are not your friend. And David, our friendship goes back quite a while, Director Taylor, and whether our thoughts and opinions align, our friendship transcends that. As a matter of fact, I was opposed to holding this hearing. I thought we had enough input, and Director Taylor says if I err, it's going to be on the side of due diligence. He was firm on that and thought we needed to have the hearing today. And I commend you for the due diligence. Over time, it'll probably serve well that we went the extra step. But I do, my opinions are informed through research of facts. They aren't largely swayed by 11th hour insurgents who are fueled with hysteria and try to shape opinions. I give due diligence and I do research, and my opinions are informed through sound, rational thinking. And I think we've gotten here today to this process as a result of sound thinking as we look at the potential discharges from this power plant and also those against the potential positives of having a power plant that is fired by natural gas versus either clean coal or the traditional coal. So I think we've gotten to this point as a result of doing the required homework. I was pleased to hear those facts iterated by Mr. Dow, further confirming the decision of my tribe and myself to support this project. I heard comments about mold. My son has asthma. He ended up having to sell his dog. He loved it. He loves it, but his was stemmed by the allergens created by having his dog. My heart broke for him, and he hated to get rid of the dog. And a lot of the homes in Charles City has a lot of humidity and an environment that produces mold and mildew. Again, allergens that react to cause asthmatic conditions as a result thereof. So again, I think due diligence has been performed. I think we're here today, and I think the only rational, reasonable decision this Air Board can make is to grant this permit to allow the construction of the power plant. I would say that as a tribe, we've gone the extra mile. We're looking to put in soil, air, and water monitors to ensure that our constituents are breathing safe air, are drinking safe water, and that we aren't polluting the land that we stand on. In the culture of my people, we think it's our responsibility to protect the environment for the next 7 generations. And I think the diligence that's been formed here is fully aligned with that philosophy. And one last comment. I plan to visit the manufacturer of these turbines. That's how seriously I take it. And I plan to look at what I learned there against other manufacturers. I'm confident we have state-of-the-art facilities coming here. So with that, I would thank you for your time. And those folks who want to help me with private utilities, when Verizon says, "Can you hear me now?" people in Charles City can't.
I guess as earlier in the meeting, I'm also known as one citizen. Over the years during which the development of the Ballico facility has taken place, public officials have been so bedazzled by the possibility of 30 pieces of silver appearing in our relatively poor county that the equally possible sale of the health of our residents and indeed the health of our planet has not been widely discussed for consideration. The letter of the law has been observed during a series of local public hearings. However, the focus has been on compliance with land use laws, cheering for tax income benefits for county coffers, and short-term construction jobs. Rarely mentioned and always in very, very hush-hush tones has been the very high potential pollution amounts, and more often denied that permissible limits would ever be met. It has become apparent that the developer has been less than forthcoming regarding the potential pollutants and their harmful health effects. Although seeming to meet minimal toxic pollutant regulatory requirements, the likelihood of hundreds, many thousands, indeed many millions of tons of health-destroying pollutants has until very recently been an area seemingly off limits to public discussion. Awareness is slowly built among our residents that these proposed frack gas burning plants would be showering our community with substances likely endangering our health and the health of our environment. As this knowledge has been shared, citizen resistance to construction of these facilities has been growing. And I might add, there are 11 Charles City people here. 5 of them would like to speak, but have been denied the possibility because they either weren't aware or didn't provide previous comments. I'd ask you let them all speak. Our relatively lower income, the median income is $16,000 below Virginia's, and 66% of our students are economically disadvantaged. Majority minority population already suffers from higher than normal rates, as you've seen before, of pulmonary diseases, including asthma, as well as cancers and diabetes. The multiple tons of discharges, especially up to 1/3 million pounds of particulate matter, will likely exacerbate the public health problems in our community. Some of my delimited comments and DEQ disputes of them from the March 5th meeting are captured on pages 19, 23, and 42 of the document for this morning. There are no specific community health monitoring requirements. There are no area-wide off-site monitoring requirements for plant operations. Although DEQ staff stated pollution modeling for the combined 2 plants had been done, no such graphics are easily or publicly available, and the internationally lowest possible polluting design does not appear to be required. My wife and I have deliberately maintained over 40 acres of mature trees on our property within 5 miles of the proposed plants, in large part to reduce air pollutants. The plants will overwhelm even our small efforts to benefit the air quality in our community. The proposed permit should be, if not denied, a decision at least delayed, especially for more public comment. Thank you for your attention.
15,000 below the Virginia median.
Yes.
66% of the public school students are economically disadvantaged.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that with what we just heard from DEQ, that the county was financially above average?
Well, I would say you'd have to question DEQ. If you look at it.
Where is, can you tell me?
Okay, sure.
Can you tell me what the source of your data is?
Sure. The U.S. Census Bureau, the small communities data shows Charles City's average median family income is a little over $55,000 a year, and the state's is significantly over $71,000 a year. The data for our students, I'm on the local school board, that's our data. I can share it with you if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your service to the Commonwealth. My name is Frida Cathcart, and I have served on 2 state boards. One was an advisory board and one was a regulatory board, the Board of Pharmacy and the Department of Health Professions. I want to remind you that when you received your appointment, you took an oath to support the Virginia and the U.S. Constitution. Whether statutes the General Assembly might put into the books are all subject to the constitutions. And earlier there was a slide that said, injunctive relief under the provisions of this chapter shall consider facts and circumstances relevant to the reasonableness of the activity involved and the regulations proposed to control it, including the social and economic value of the activity involved. And what I'm going to talk to you today was what I had commented on earlier, but I didn't really see it addressed by the DEQ staff, was the economic considerations of this project. And I brought this, where's the This is a handout that I brought to the board. I apologize that the font is so small.
Is this new information, Ms. Cathcart?
It's information that was filed by Series that was presented at the SCC hearing for Dominion's IRP in May of 2019. And why it's applicable is because my comments that I gave is that we're in the middle of an economic disruption because renewable energy has come down substantially in price faster than people thought it would be. And it is out performing the fossil fuel industry. And this is a letter that was signed by essentially 10 tech giants: Adobe, Akamai Technologies, Apple, AWS, Equinix, Iron Mountain, LinkedIn Corporation, Microsoft Corporation, Salesforce, and QTS. And in it talks about, given the significance of our growing and energy-intensive industry in relation to total energy demand in Virginia, companies' data center energy interests should be taken into account in decisions regarding the future of the region's energy infrastructure. In particular, companies providing or leasing data centers want to power our operations with renewable energy resources like wind and solar. Data centers are at the forefront of the innovative energy efficiency technologies to reduce the energy burden of our operations. Energy storage technologies are here today and should be integrated into grid planning. Energy storage projects facilitate the integration of renewable energy resources, provide numerous benefits to the grid, and mitigate the need for natural gas peaker plants. Solar plus storage projects are beating out the price of new gas plants, and data centers are already proving the effectiveness of storage in our 24/7 operations. Grid planners should take these points into account before building expensive fossil fuel infrastructure projects. Any such investments should be closely assessed for their lifetime costs to ratepayers. Now, this plant doesn't have that, but for both the infrastructure and associated fuel costs, the likelihood of becoming an early stranded asset, which that's what would happen to the shareholders in this plant, and actual customer demand for fossil fuel powered electricity. So it's important for you, and you're making your decisions and you're asking great questions, to talk about why risk the air quality of people in Virginia and put at risk shareholders for a project that is not up to date. It's 2019 and things have changed even within the last year when this project was approved by the SCC.
Okay,
Thank you for your time.
I'm Johns. I'm an attorney here on behalf of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club did submit technical comments on this permit, and we were glad to see that the department incorporated several of those into the final permit. We think that it made the right decision as to alterations to the greenhouse gas limits, to alternate modes, including water washing and tuning. One technical issue that is outstanding that I would be remiss if I didn't address, and it's an issue that I think I've addressed before the board before, but we at Sierra Club are very concerned that data and assumptions that go into setting permit limits or potential to omit calculations aren't part of the permitting record. This is the second permit we've been involved in where there are just vague references to certain information, but none of that information or the underlying assumptions on which it's based is actually disclosed to the public. And we think that's an important aspect, and that the board should do more to ensure that doesn't happen again. I also want to address the question of notice, public participation in general. The terms of 9 VAC 580 1775C require that an applicant hold an informational briefing within the designated time period, and that at a minimum, the applicant shall provide information on and answer questions about, and I'm looking at little Roman 2 in that subsection, the Roman 1, the specific pollutants and the total quality of each that the applicant estimates will be emitted from the facility. Now, based on the emails that were discussed earlier today, I think it's pretty clear that there was no one at that hearing, even DEQ's representatives, who were able to give the public that information about the estimates that will be emitted. From what I understand, the department was able to eventually identify the specific pollutants, but based on those emails, it sounds like the representative of the company was not there to answer that question. That is a legal requirement. I understand that the department believes that under their interpretation, they think that there's been constructive or substantial compliance. Ultimately, though, it is the board's decision to make, not only because you are the final decision makers on this permit, but also because these are your regulations. And the board, if anyone, is the one who's entitled to interpret the provisions of those and at least interpret them in a way that would be subject to deference on judicial review. So we encourage the board to really ensure that the public participation guidelines that you've set out, that carry the force of law, and under Virginia law, the Supreme Court has held that administrative agencies must scrupulously observe their own regulations, and that includes procedural regulations like the ones that issue here. Finally, on the topic of public participation, I believe Mr. Dowd correctly noted that involvement of the community is an important part of that, an important part of environmental justice. And it's clear based on the response to comments and the engineering analysis in the permit record here that DEQ's environmental analysis environmental justice analysis, was based entirely on compliance with the NAAQS. This is in the response to comments at page 4 through 7, and even the citation to the Energy Answers case from the Environmental Appeals Board demonstrates that the primary environmental justice analysis here was just confirming that the permit would be in compliance with the NAAQS. The environment, or the external civil rights compliance toolkit that the EPA has promulgated in 2017, while I believe everything Mr. Dowd said is accurate, I don't believe it gives the full story of what that toolkit says. I can quote the exact language. This is on page 12 of that toolkit. The fact that an area is designated as in attainment with the NAAQS and that the recent permitting record shows that emissions from the facility under consideration would not cause a violation of the NAAQS. The EPA has advised permitting agencies that for purposes of federal civil rights law, that is not determinative of whether there is a disparate impact on the community. And that's the case because many of the pollutants that are at issue here are what are called non-threshold pollutants, or what may be non-threshold pollutants. Ozone, of which volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides are a precursor, and particulate matter, although the science is a little bit less settled on that, but the EPA has specifically recognized in promulgating its NAAQS that those are or may be non-threshold pollutants, meaning that any incremental increase is likely to have some adverse effect on the population. While NAAQS are developed to protect public health to a certain degree, the Clean Air Act itself and the PSD program more so recognize that there will be impacts, and that those impacts still can affect minority and low-income communities. And that's especially true considering the fact that those communities often act as a magnet for pollutant-emitting facilities. And we encourage the board to reconsider its procedures for encouraging public participation amongst environmental justice communities, especially in light of the cumulative impacts that might come. I think doing things on a divide and conquer basis is not sufficiently informing the citizens of the burdens on their environment that they're likely to face. If the board has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise,
Mr. Johns, what do you see as the board's potential remedy for what you conclude is an inadequate informational meeting? An additional public comment period, or what?
I think the permitting action isn't complete. There hasn't been, every procedural step up to granting the permit hasn't been fulfilled. And so I think there would need to be another informational meeting that meets the terms of the regulations, and then follow the procedures through that timeline again to reach a final decision.
Thank you.
So if PM 2.5 is an incremental pollutant, so there's no safe threshold, which you stated and I've read and the EPA has stated, and if NAAQS isn't a determinative criteria, and so if you were going to build a facility that emits any PM 2.5, where in the heck can you put it? It's always going to be extra emissions that are potentially impact health someplace, isn't it?
Certainly, and I would encourage the board to review the external compliance toolkit because it addresses that exact question. This is not to say that you cannot build a facility there. It's just that certain additional protections might be required. The civil rights laws are very clear that even the failure to act or implement a policy that can mitigate some of the environmental justice problems in an otherwise neutral, facially neutral permitting program or other environmental program can be a violation of civil rights laws. It's just a matter of building in additional substantive or procedural safeguards.
I have a question for you as well. You mentioned that the remedy or cure would be having another informational meeting. Without conceding whether or not there was an informational meeting, which you doubt or dispute, and DEQ has described, I think, 2 different opportunities to do that. Putting all that aside, do you see it more as a procedural step that, checks the box on a legal requirement? Or is there, what substance would you want to get out of that so that, having another meeting makes sense? Because to the extent that the informational meeting is to identify very basic information, we seem to be pretty far down the road to that. So what exactly would you wish to cure and how?
So the question is, at what point in the process do citizens finally have enough information to begin planning how they would respond, gathering information, organizing in different ways? That's a key part of these procedural safeguards and the ability to inform the public about things that are going to happen in their backyard. I may have described them as procedural, but in a way they are more than that, because I believe environmental justice and the environmental justice requirements that apply to this board are put a value on participation, community, being informed, and being transparent to the community about what's going to happen there. And that's a good in its own right.
I agree on the importance of public participation, and in fact, there are requirements, legal requirements, policy requirements to that. I was just trying to dig a little bit deeper on Mr. Hoagland's question about if here's where we are, let's not label it for now, if here's where we are, what is the cure, other than going back and having another informational meeting to put forward the kinds of information that now have been public for some time. And I'm not weighing in on whether there's merit or not merit to that. I'm just trying to think through what is it that you would look to in this proceeding that you would ask of us to do.
Certainly, and I think my comments before were just trying to emphasize that there is a substantive reason why all of these procedural safeguards are built in. And that even just upholding the rule of law is important, frankly. And when the steps to alert the community haven't been taken, I believe the only remedy is to go back and make sure that the decision has the underlying procedural validity to it.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate your elaboration.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Members of the board, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Morgan Johns, and being from Richmond, I can't claim the perspective of someone immediately affected by the Chickahominy power plant. However, I'm unsettled by the fact that the surrounding community hardly knows what is being inflicted upon them, let alone how to stand up to it. My peers have spoken directly with Charles City residents, inquiring about their general awareness and opinion of the plant, as well as the role they felt in its processes. The results were disheartening. Awareness was minimal and opinion opposing. As far as this meeting, the location is a private facility, and while convenient for myself, actual Charles City residents would have had to commute an hour. It is also in the middle of a workday, which is already inconvenient, especially when the round trip costs 2 working hours. As far as the other meetings, more people may have attended the Chickahominy gathering, but only 3 came to the DEQs, and that is what's on the government record. Multiple reports of this process have emphasized that the statutory requirement briefing has been insufficient. One comment labeling it as close enough. But this board cannot settle for close enough. The lives directly affected cannot settle for close enough. Just before the break, a power plant representative attributed extreme levels of wastewater pollution to kinks on how they measure these values. That in itself demonstrates a lack of respect for the system and displaces their own responsibility. Oddly though, I do agree with part of that statement. The values are in need of updating. Truly acceptable emission and pollution levels would not already contribute to increased COPD, asthma, and cancer in the region. The plant is to be built alongside a Dominion Energy facility, major landfill, and Novi's C4GT. The compounding effects of these massive emission sources will expedite health issues exponentially. Not to mention that, as demonstrated by a chart referenced earlier, these outputs may far exceed those of other existing facilities. On a side note, this undermines the claim that the best available control technology is being used. Authorizing the PSD permit today would prioritize short-term profit over long-term human well-being. Extension of the comment period is precedented by the Buckingham compressor station case. Delaying the project is a small price to pay when the alternative recklessly fast-tracks danger. Failure for Balico and the Chickahominy Power to comply demonstrates a dim confidence in public support, thus acknowledging their own weaknesses. In this polarized age, the single common thread shared by every American government institution must be a commitment to democracy. Without providing a fair say for Charles City by extending the comment period, the most basic and non-controversial of American values is limited. I wish I had more time to delve into the fact that I, as a young person, will have to one day deal with the catastrophic effects that result from projects such as this. But all I can really do now is take action in these small, localized steps. I do have a collection of relevant climate research facts conducted by Lyra Bartell, an attendee today, if you'd like it. But the best you can do for my future today is vote against this PSD permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johns.
Today was going to be that the citizens of the Air Pollution Control Board cannot make an adequately informed decision about the case today and must continue rigorous review of the Chickahominy Power Station over the next months, including...
Can you please identify yourself?
Mary Finley Brook, University of Richmond.
Thank you.
So that would include opening a new process for input. And so my message is still that you cannot make an informed decision today. So if you feel that you are forced to vote, specifically by the company not being willing to work with you to provide even a few more days, then you must absolutely deny. This is one of the most flawed permitting processes I've ever witnessed. Unfortunately, I was forced to stand in front of you just about 9 months ago and say that exact same thing. I just decided sitting here today that one of my next research articles was going to be to examine this research, this regulatory process, and try and figure out which one was worse, Buckingham Compressor Station or this one. They are both absolutely flawed. This one certainly is a stellar mess, but it's still relatively young. We don't know necessarily what could happen because, as we know with Buckingham County Compressor Station, it's currently caught up in 3 lawsuits specifically aimed at this board, people at this table, and the DEQ. And there's also 1 lawsuit targeting federal regulatory agencies. So we know we need to pay attention to what happened there. There are many reasons why this permitting process is so inadequate. Charles City County is more than 50% people of color, as we've heard, so that's obviously a threshold for enhanced review. In contrast to what we would expect to see in this situation throughout the permitting process, for the largest energy facility plant in the state, there has been a near complete absence of public input. Today you're hearing from, and you will hear from more citizens in Charles City, residents from across the state, that any lack of prior engagement was never disinterest or because they were not concerned. People simply were not informed. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those ways. We've heard about it a couple of times already. But what I've seen from my experience is that when people find out about this, and a lot of people did show up today, including people from Charles City that have just recently found out about this, they are immediately concerned. They want more information. So, State Corporation Commission hearing is the first place there was not enough public input. There were no public comments. The county government represented the whole public in those hearings. The Chickahominy Power Information Sessions, we've heard there was 4. Only one of them was attended by our one famous person here. And I saw how that was announced in the paper. I actually had the pages where the announcement was, and I'm looking, and I can't even find the announcements. That's how teeny it is in those papers. People did not know about it. That's why nobody showed up, except for one person. We know about the DEQ hearing in Charles City. There were, 10 public attendees. We heard about that. But today, the worst example, as far as blocking participation, is that we have people who could not submit a comment because they did not know these plants were under discussion, that are in the room today, that want to speak and are being blocked. And for me, that is really the most violation of not hearing from people because of those other impediments. And so the question that you just gave to the previous lawyer is, well, so if there was a violation, and I will talk about that violation that occurred in the information sessions. So if there was that violation, and so what we do know is that in the session, the company officials could not answer basic things about pollutants. If that process had been done correctly, I believe people would have been informed earlier on. I think they would have come to those other sessions. I think they would have made public comment. I think the people here who were not being allowed to speak, that we're not hearing from, would have been heard in this process, and I think it would change the overall equation. So I don't agree that it is a past after the fact, check the box and make sure that information meeting happens. It really messed up the whole process, and you all need to think very seriously about whether this process, what can happen at this point, because the regulatory requirements were not met. And it's impossible to go back and inform people after the fact, as you know. So this is something that really needs to be addressed. It's a fundamental flaw. People did not know this plant was being proposed. In that session, DEQ admitted to having to fill in to cover Balco LLC's role when they were not able to do that. But then we hear that the company put in a new, better application. And so DEQ then decides not to hold another information session. They had already gone on the record saying that it was not enough, but they had also said because more than a year had passed, that backed the best available control technology review had to be redone. So not only is it not in public consciousness, people are not aware of it because it doesn't happen close to when the rest of this permitting process is going to happen. It was in May of 2017, but also something as important as pollution, impacts of pollution, the specifics on that, and the backed was never then brought to the public in a timely fashion as close to this permit. So again, I think we really need to think about how fundamentally that flaw changes this entire process. So certainly you do need to, if anything, open up and have there be more public comment. Again, I don't think you can remedy what has already happened, but I do think we still need to hear from people. We need to hear from the people in the room, and then we do need to hear from all of the people who still have not heard about this plant. Your only other choice would be rejection. More public comment or rejection. DEQ said this meeting was close enough. Even though those regulations were broken, so much time had happened after that session in 2017. And we know that the application was made better essentially by the consultants, AECom. And so we still remain uncertain, and I think you saw today they couldn't answer questions about evacuation. There was a lot of things that people couldn't answer. There is not necessarily the knowledge, experience, and readiness coming at this point to show that this company is prepared, qualified to run the largest gas plant in the Commonwealth. Now, if there hadn't been so much information redacted from the SCC application, we might have had more information. But with the information we have and how we're seeing this company perform, speaking to the public, speaking in hearings like this, getting information in, communicating regularly with DEQ, because there was that long gap. So DEQ was left unprepared in November of 2018 when they came back with that application. That was not expected. Then there was another round of application right after that in January 2019. So all of this contributes, and that is on the company for not staying in communication. So there's a lot of problems from that period that we can't just say, well, good enough. In addition to the negative local health impacts from the daily exposures of particulate matter and the volatile organic compounds, I'm also concerned that the health of the Chesapeake Bay will be harmed by the addition of the nitrogen oxides that are coming from this plant. We don't know how much of those are going to end up exactly in the bay. We know that what goes up comes down, and we know that we need to be very, very careful about that. So 407 tons every year from this one plant is what it's allowed to do. That is so significant. That really goes against what this administration says it is concerned about. So we also heard incorrectly from DEQ that the NOx are protective of human health. We've already heard people address that that's not necessarily true. It's not just my assessment, because there again is this lawsuit against this body and the DEQ, specifically filed 2 weeks ago today. And so again, it's about the Buckingham compressor station. One argument in this suit is the lack of protection of the NOx due to the relationship between environmental justice and NOx, and another argument is tied to cumulative exposures. You have asked about cumulative exposures. That answer has not been addressed adequately. This is an environmental justice population, comprehensive and cumulative exposures, pre-existing conditions. All of this needs to be taken into consideration, and you are trained enough to know that. You are trained enough to know that.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
The risks, putting in a new fire department does not necessarily mean that you're going to be prepared for this large gas facility. So my recommendation is, of course, reject.
Do you go by Finley Brook, is that correct? So Dr. Finley Brook, my understanding is you've done a lot of your professional work on environmental justice, and you've heard my questions on some of this. One of the questions I have that I'm still having difficulty resolve is you just stated that the community is more than 50% people of color. DEQ says the population area surrounding the proposed power plant is not majority minority. Can you reconcile those for me?
Well, so the more than 50% comes from the county averages, and so that would be the first thing that you would use. You would go beyond that if you look at, there's been a lot of different demographic analysis of the exact site. So what that analysis says, more or less, and again, that should have been the responsibility of people to do a fundamental analysis, but I'm seeing about 40% African American and up to right at that facility site between 10 and 19% Native American. So that right at that site, and again, you all have seen this mapped out, you've seen the spatial analysis that breaks it down by census block group, which is that closer area, and that does definitely get over that 50%.
So I do this a lot. In layman's terms, it's a question of where you draw the line. So in certain census blocks surrounding the plant, there is clearly a minority-majority population. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And overall, within the whole county, though, there is still over 50% minority population.
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Opportunity to speak. My name is Karen Gill. I'm a resident of Eastern Henrico County. Jessica Bull, who gave me her minutes, she is the mother whose daughter had commentary earlier, and she had to go home to give her daughter a nap. So I am here representing mothers. I am a grandmother of 12. I wasn't prepared to speak today, so I don't have prepared remarks, but what we know is that our climate change is drastic, and the future of our children is at stake. I'm old enough to remember what it felt like to be able to run outside on summer days without worrying about having my feet burned, or to play outside without worrying about air quality, or to live in a place where tornadoes were rare rather than, like the numbers have increased exponentially over the last 5 decades. So right now there's an oil refinery in Philadelphia that has exploded, and they are working now to put out the fire. I don't think that Charles City is prepared to provide the level of care, and I don't know, I'm not a citizen, but I don't think that they're prepared to deal with the possibility of real catastrophic experiences in their county at this time. And our atmosphere doesn't stop at the boundaries of the county. And so all of us are at risk for the amount of pollutants that are being put in the air by this power plant. So I would really, really ask you to please consider the future of our children, the future of our planet as you make your decision today. Thank you.
Right now does not have the capacity to handle major disasters like a major fire or something else that could happen at the plant. The kind of services that they could provide are inadequate. What, in your opinion, hypothetically, not that we are saying it's going to happen, but let's say hypothetically it did happen, what, in your opinion, could be done to provide those services more adequately? How could they be addressed? Do you have any?
Well, one of the things that has concerned me this morning is hearing that Charles City doesn't have the infrastructure that even can provide high-speed internet, and cell phone service, I think, is spotty. I've worked in Charles City on occasion, and if we can't even rely on communication systems, it's really hard to imagine that adequate response could be deployed in an adequate amount of time, in my opinion.
So let's say we had infinite resources. I'm not saying we do, but let's say we did. How do you think that could be remedied?
When I see the video of the power plant or the oil refinery in Philadelphia exploding, there's not enough adequate resources, in my opinion, to respond to that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Suzanne Keller. She has 6 minutes.
My name is Suzanne Keller. I'm a retired epidemiologist and member of the steering and advocacy committees of the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. I am honored to speak today on behalf of our membership of over 300 physicians, nurses, allied health professionals, and students. Thank you, Mr. Langford, members of the board, Director Paler, for the opportunity to bring a health focus to the consideration of the Battleco Chickahominy Power Plant air permit. Given the harm caused by emission from gas plants, there are at least 3 elements of the draft permit that concern us: greenhouse gas emissions, environmental justice, and the health impacts on the residents of Charles City County who reside in the vicinity of the proposed power plant. The health impacts of climate change are severe and increasing. Rising temperatures, extreme weather, rising sea levels all contribute to increased exposure to air pollution, vector-borne disease, allergens, waterborne pathogens, and extreme heat. In addition, extreme weather is associated with injuries, fatalities, and mental health impacts. Clinicians across the Commonwealth already see the health impacts of climate change among their patients, with increased hospital admissions for heat-related conditions, longer and more severe allergy symptoms, and I stand before you with 3 months of allergy symptoms, and they're still going. Longer distress about poor air quality that limits outdoor activity for children and elders, increases Lyme disease and other vector-borne diseases. The recent IPCC and National Climate Assessment reports call for immediate action to stem the worst effects of climate change. It is imperative that we act now to reduce greenhouse gases. We do not think that it is reasonable to permit new greenhouse gas emitting power plants in the face of climate change. In addition, the Environmental Justice Review completed by DEQ does not consider the harmful and disproportionate impact on the minority and Native American residents who reside within 5-mile radius of the facility. The DEQ must include local demographic information in its EJ analysis, and it must include an assessment of the vulnerability of the population most affected by the facility. At a bare minimum, you should have been provided with data on the rates of asthma, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions that increase vulnerability among nearby residents. Lastly, the permit is silent on the health impact of exposures to those who reside closest to the source. Let me say that again. The permit is silent on the health impact of exposures to those who reside closest to the source. There is nothing in the DEQ analysis that addresses dose, duration of exposure, or the vulnerability of the exposed. The assumption that compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards sufficiently addresses health because they are health-based standards does not speak to the health consequences for those exposed to the proposed emissions. Moreover, recent studies, including a large review of Medicare data, found that exposure to particulate matter 2.5 and to ozone at concentrations below the NAAQS led to adverse effects. In that study, minorities and low-income people were particularly vulnerable. For the reasons discussed above, we respectfully ask the board to use its authority to deny the permit for the Chickahominy power plant. That concludes my remarks for the VCCA. I'm now going to speak as a citizen of the Commonwealth. I just have a few more things to say that are my personal comments. When I reviewed the mini book that DEQ submitted to you and read the environmental justice analysis, I think I've said this to you before, it was deja vu. Same old argument, same old claims, same tired and inadequate assessment of environmental justice. After the Buckingham compressor station, I would think that DEQ could have learned from that experience, not presented the board again with an EJ screen that is only for screening purposes. Even the Department of Transportation in Virginia would not submit that kind of analysis to their board. If you go and look at any of their EJ analyses, they do census block analysis in the corridor and vicinity of projects they're working on, like the census block analysis that was provided to you by Dr. Metz. DEQ does not seem to understand the concepts of vulnerability that must be considered to assess disproportionate impact. For the populations at risk, young children, the elderly, those with pre-existing condition, exposure to emission standards that meet the NAAQS may well be harmful. And the closer you are to the emitting source, the more harmful it is. We went through this with the Buckingham compressor station. Particulate matter, close to where it's being emitted, you wouldn't want to stand behind the tailpipe of a diesel truck. None of us would do that. And yet we're asking the residents of Charles City County to live near the tailpipe of the Balico power plant, when particulate matter is its most dangerous. That we were understanding better the mechanism of injury of particulate matter. When it's first emitted, it has sharp edges that allows it to get deeper into the lungs, pass into the bloodstream. This is a very dangerous air pollution. And yet we're subjecting people who live nearby to this pollution, if you approve the permit. Having listened to the comments this morning, and I've also read the record. This plant was first proposed in 2015. The company apparently gave an incompetent presentation. I'll wrap it up, Cindy. What I would say is they spent 4 years getting to this day to give more time to let people consider what is going to be happening in their community. Seems to me to be a very reasonable thing. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions?
I'm Peter Anderson. I am the Virginia Program Manager at environmental organization Appalachian Voices. Thank you for your time today, for a lot of discussion. I'm going to try to spare you. Prepared a lot of comments. Try to not repeat discussions that we've had with other folks and things that have been covered adequately already, to the best of my ability here. But in response to DEQ's comment summary and response to the comments that I submitted, I'm going to focus my comments on environmental justice considerations today. So I want to start with a brief reminder to you, the board, of your authority under Virginia Code 10.1-1307. You saw it on Mr. Dowd's slides. You've got the 4-factor test to consider the reasonableness of permitting the Chickahominy Power Station. The first element being the degree of injury to safety and health is pretty much the gist of that factor. The second one being the social and economic value of the activity. The third being the site suitability. And the fourth being the scientific and economic practicality of reducing or eliminating the discharge. So part of your task today is to determine whether permitting a second major PSD source, the Chickahominy Power Station, within 1 mile of another major PSD source, which DEQ permitted about a year ago, the C4GT Power Station, both of which are in close proximity to the Charles City Road landfill, if that is reasonable and suitable to the area. So not only, this 4-factor test gives you sort of broad authority to consider environmental justice. But something that has gotten a little airtime today is not so much your authority, but a command to agencies of the Commonwealth under Title 67 in the Commonwealth Energy Policy, which reads in relevant part that it shall be the policy of the Commonwealth to ensure that the development of new or expansion of existing energy resources or facilities does not have a disproportionate adverse impact on economically disadvantaged or minority communities. That's at 67-102A11. It goes on to say in subpart C that all agencies and political subdivisions of the Commonwealth in taking discretionary action with regard to energy issues shall recognize the elements of the Commonwealth energy policy and where appropriate shall act in a manner consistent therewith. So drilling down into the EJ issues, We spent a lot of time today on the EJ screen runs that DEQ provided. You should have gotten those in Appendix C to the engineering analysis. So we talked about the 1, 2, and 5 mile radii that were looked at with where the EJ screens found 42, 45, and 34 as the percentages of minority populations at those levels. And we haven't talked that much about the percentiles. So the 1 mile radius fell into the 61st percentile. I think this is for the state level. I think. Let me double check that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then at the 2 mile radius, that was the 65th percentile. And at the 5 mile radius, that was the 52nd percentile. So at radii 1 and 2, those are above state averages for minority populations, and then 5 mile radius was not above state average, but it was the 52nd percentile nonetheless. So those are the location right around the proposed site. Blowing it out to the county level, just Googling on the US Census data reveals that Charles City County is 58% roughly minority. 45.9% of the population identifies as Black or African American. Department of Health and Human Services noted in 2014 that African Americans are almost 3 times more likely to die from asthma-related causes than the white population. And we've also talked about the statistically significant percentage of folks in Charles City County identifying as American Indian or Alaska Native. Performing EJ screen is a good start, but as has been discussed in this and in the hearings over the compressor station in Buckingham, EJ screen is not the definitive tool. It's just for screening it's to let you know if we need to do more in-depth analysis. And so with the numbers in DEQ's EJ screen, I think it's clear that more analysis is needed. And the Federal Interagency Working Group on EJ recommends supplementing EJ screen with local demographic data provided by the community and tribes. Argue that DEQ has not taken this step. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here into the NAAQS compliance issue and the civil rights compliance that Mr. Johns went over so thoroughly. So it looks like Mr. Dowd's slide was more nuanced today, but what I saw in the mini book was essentially the argument that because NAAQS will remain in attainment, there is no adverse or disproportionate impact. That was essentially the argument that was there. And as has been discussed previously, that argument is outdated and should be rejected by this board. According to the EPA's Civil Rights Compliance Office Compliance Toolkit, published in January 2017, that's no longer the policy of the EPA. Instead, EPA says to consider NAAQS attainment concurrently with other information, including a separate analysis of pollution hotspots. So please, we'd ask that you don't rely on the NAAQS attainment as the determinant factor on whether or not there's adverse disproportionate impacts. Finally, talking about community participation. Is that me? All right. I will wrap it up. We've already heard about the insufficient information briefing that did not comply with 9 VAC 580-1775, so I don't need to repeat that. So my ask here today is that you, given the timing issue that was discussed at the start of the meeting, if there's no agreement between the board and the agency and the applicant about extending the deadline for more comment and more analysis, I think your remedy to that is to deny the permit today. The applicant can reapply when the analysis has been done, and that can come before you again.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Anderson? The EJ screen in front of me when you were going through those numbers, and I had read your comments. DEQ relied a lot on the value, the average value, sort of deciding whether or not there was an EJ justice issue. And the screen then talks about percentile and state, which is what you relied on when you just gave your testimony. So even when there is a below, I hope I'm using the right words, even when the value for the minority population in the 5-mile radius is below the state average, 34 versus 37, the percentile in the state is still 52. Can you tell me how you use that number versus the average, or what it means to you in terms of deciding whether or not there's an environmental justice issue?
I'll try to answer that question to the best of my ability. So the percentile just means if it's 52nd percentile, that score was higher than 52%, the other 52% of the units studied, right? So whether that's the
So in
state
other words,
or the
the
United
average
States.
could still be higher than,
Right, and so the average could be higher if the scores that beat that score were way above average. Then you would still have a score that's maybe below the average, but still the 52nd percentile.
so the percentile in state is the more determinative number than whether or not whether the actual value is or is not above or below the state average.
Well, I think more determinative is either up to the board or I mean, you'd have to look at EPA guidance on this, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question, and this could be analysis that you have not done, but I ask regardless to see if it's something that you can shed some light on. Did you come across, when you were looking at the proximate distances, basing the population on the 0.5, 1, 2, 3, 5-mile radius, what percentage of Charles City County populations was concentrated at those distances? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, if at the 1-mile radius you only have 2 people living, not that their lives are not important, but what was the concentration of population out of the 5,000-6,000 people that live in Charles City County? How are they spread out between the different distances? Do you have any knowledge on that?
So I think I understand the question. It's not a question that I analyzed in my preparation for this, but I imagine that
It looks like the EQ may have.
I imagine the agency has the answer to that.
It's actually on the top of each mile run.
Of each screen.
For example.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So it's.
Mr. Faggart, you want to come over and answer her specific question, how many in the 2-mile run?
Exactly, just for example, for the 1-mile run, the population estimate was 132 citizens or folks. For 2 miles, it was approximately 1,250. And then for 5 miles, it jumps up to 9,422.
Thank you, sir. Are there other questions for the speaker?
That can't be right. I'm reminded just to, the 5-mile run extends outside of Charles City County, so that's why some folks might say, wait, that's more than the entire population.
Because it's a geographic circle, it's
Exactly.
not a jurisdictional boundary analysis.
Exactly.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Hopefully that settles some things. No more questions, I don't think. Oh, we do have one.
I just want to make sure I was following all of that at the very end. I got the numbers there. In terms of the question you asked, do you have any information on any hotspots in this area? I mean, did you look at, population concentrations, impacts that you associate? Is there anything like that?
I'll tell you what I looked at, which is the same information as in your book, so DEQ ZJ screen runs. And so in terms of, we know that the landfill is there, and I think, subject to check, is the landfill also a waste-to-energy facility? Yes. Okay.
But you don't have any...
DEQ has the answer to this question, but I don't.
No, that's fair enough. We have the information from DEQ, but I was just wondering if you had done that analysis yourself, or is this all that we're looking at?
I did not do an independent hotspot pollution analysis myself, no.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next.
And I'm with a volunteer with the Richmond Interfaith Climate Justice Group. Thank you for your work and your diligence to execute your charge. As a concerned citizen of the Commonwealth, I have had the benefit of access to the internet to gain information, deadlines, and information about dates and times of meetings. I have a pretty clear understanding of the aspects of the Chickahominy fracked gas plant, both pro and against. I have some understanding of the permitting process, including that comment deadline periods determines one's ability to be able to speak at these citizen air board meetings. And I have the ability to submit comments electronically. I was truly concerned when I found out that so few local residents around the site of this plant, whose economic stability, health, and quality of life will be most affected, did not have the above benefits that I had. I disagree that the DEQ's efforts to communicate with local residents was thorough and effective. Earlier, we heard that the central components of the permit decision-making process are the DEQ, the Air Board, and the applicant. The essential and missing elements here are citizens. I, along with many others, concerned that many local county citizens may not have had full information for a variety of reasons. We conducted our own outreach. We canvassed households within 5 miles of the site. We made phone calls and sent emails inviting people to two informational meetings, one in New Kent and one in Charles City County. In 3 days, these efforts yielded, for myself, a greater understanding that increasingly rural, economically depressed, beautiful and clean areas of our state are sites for these massive polluting projects. I would say sacrificial zones to the benefit of the rest of the state. We've seen this with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline Compressor Station and the Cumberland landfill, and now these 2 gas plants proposed for Charles City County. One comment I heard was, we don't want to be another Hopewell. 240 signatures on a petition of Charles City County residents that were collected in 3 days, most of them in 1 day. We had attendance of over 40 local residents to an informational meeting, significantly more than the one stalwart person that attended the DEQ informational meeting. And we have an attendance of 12 local residents who were eager and happy and prepared to speak with you today and have not been able to do that. I personally spoke with over 60 Charles City County residents and discovered that many elderly residents are there, 8 with COPD, 2 with heart disease or oxygen, 3 households with young children, 2 pregnant women, 5 residents with asthma, and 1 with cancer, just in my canvassing alone. I believe that you would discover many more health issues through a comprehensive health impact study. I suggest that the Air Board, the DEQ, and the applicant has not received or can benefit from the real and essential understanding of the input of local residents. I'm almost done. As a citizen board, frankly, it's shocking that you would feel confident to proceed on this permit decision knowing that you have so few comments from local and most affected citizens. I propose that you extend the comment period time. And I would say that after being in so many of these meetings over 4.5 years, that it's so disappointing that somehow the DEQ and the citizen boards who have as your charge protecting the health and well-being of citizens are often aligned with corporate interests and the corporate applicants and not feeling like I'm being represented.
Your
Thank
time
you.
has expired.
Gotcha.
Line with anybody. We're trying to do our job objectively, so please. I wasn't pleased to hear that allegation, certainly about me. Are you a Charles City County resident?
No, I'm a Richmond resident.
Okay. Are you near the plant? The reason I'm asking, could you tell me, do you get the publication that the ad was placed in?
I don't get the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and I live in Richmond.
No, it was in the, what was it?
New Kent Charles City Chronicle.
I do not know.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Maybe aligned wasn't the right word, but I always feel like I'm not being heard or represented by this board.
I can assure you, I heard you.
Thank you.
Focused inquiry, but I'm here as a concerned citizen, and my first task is to read 2 emails I've received from citizens in Charles City County in the past, I would say 15 hours or so. The first, they're both members of...
Mr. Chairman, just before she gets going, I just want to make it clear that those are not part of the official public comment file. Okay.
Okay, so they are both members of the Cedar Grove Baptist Church, which is 2 miles from the proposed site. The first letter is from Reverend Wayne Henley, the senior pastor. He says, "My name is Reverend F. Wayne Henley. For the past 16 plus years, I have served as the senior pastor of the Cedar Grove Baptist Church in Charles City, Virginia. As recently as 6 days ago, my congregation and I were informed that a third power plant is being considered for Charles City County. I am unable to attend your meeting because of such short notice, but would be interested in learning more about the proposed project. The overall health of the people in our community is of great concern, and we hope that you will find it in your hearts to allow us more time to gather more information before you make a decision. In writing to respectfully request, I am writing to respectfully request that the decision to approve a new natural gas-fired power plant for Roxbury and Chambers Road in Charles City be postponed until members of the Charles City community have had ample time to learn more about the proposal. I do understand your time is valuable and you have previously held meetings for asking for public comment. However, a high percentage of Charles City residents were unaware of those meetings. I do believe, given at least one more opportunity, the great citizens of Charles City County would jump at the chance to share their feelings on the project. Thanks for your time and your listening ear." The second email I'm sharing is from Lavisha Rollins, who is the clerk of the Cedar Grove Baptist Church. I'm sorry, I had to read this from an email because she didn't have time to actually submit this and me print it. And for some reason my email is messed up all of a sudden. I'm gonna see if I can open it up again. Anyhow, okay, there it is.
Just you.
All right, so as clerk of Cedar Grove Baptist Church of Providence Forge, Virginia, my job is to communicate with all members any changes that impact the church, community, and fellow members of our Christian community. Many organizations contact us by email, mailed letters, and personal appearances for significant events happening within the county. I have held this position for the past 3 years and attended the same church for over 25 years and have not received any documentation showing anything regarding the proposed plan. As a leader of the church, it is my responsibility to let members know of any information that will impact their way of life, impact our church membership, and body as a whole. I was not given that opportunity. Furthermore, our representative did not come to our church to announce such a huge undertaking by the county. We have an annual Family and Friends Day service that brings in 400 to 600 people annually within the community. We offer free booths to announce anything going on in the county. Nothing was done by our representative or anyone from the county regarding this. However, we did have the new EMS department head come and speak about EMS service, but it was never mentioned about the power plant. That seems ironic to me, but assumptions will not help anyone. Charles City is a community built on history, family, and community. Our community consists of a majority Black and Chickahominy Indian community members. We cannot afford to lose this sense of community for a measly $3.8 million in unguaranteed funds. We have suffered this at the hands of the landfill, which has driven many of our past community members away. We are barely surviving, and now our one lifeline of rebuilding this historic community into something great is being taken away from us. In sum, I'm going to wrap up. She asked, please allow the citizens to do our due diligence and get the information to the masses. Allow the feedback to be documented and given back to make a total informed decision on whether we will accept such a development or we will allow another opportunity which we are aligned with come into our community.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Time has expired.
Nathan Souls, and I'm with Zero Carbon Virginia. I'm a systems engineer from Loudoun County, home of Data Center Alley, the world's largest concentration of data centers. It's often said that more than 70% of the world's internet traffic passes through our digital infrastructure. Balico Chickahominy Power has cited the growth in data centers in Northern Virginia as a reason for building the Chickahominy Power Station. However, this is a dubious rationale. Many companies with large data centers have commitments to using renewable energy. In fact, a letter from Adobe, Akamai Technologies, Apple, Amazon Web Services, Equinix, Iron Mountain, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Salesforce, and QTS was sent to Dominion. You guys have that letter from the previous speaker. And in that letter, they expressed a preference for clean, renewable energy and their concern for the continued use of fossil fuel-based electricity. They specifically mentioned solar plus storage as a better option over natural gas. Currently, the Commonwealth of Virginia, less than 1% of our electricity comes from solar, and effectively none of it comes from wind. We will need to make great strides in deploying renewable energy in order to keep up with demand from data centers. If we do not, we will lose business. Building a large natural gas plant like this 1,650 megawatt Chickahominy power station is a big step in the wrong direction, especially considering that Dominion has already built a similarly sized natural gas plant last year. The expected life of these plants is 36 years. Charles City County and its surrounding region have high rates of hospitalizations from asthma, as according to a report from the Virginia Department of Health. The American Lung Association gives Charles City a B grade on ground level ozone, which is a known contributor to respiratory ailments. According to DEQ, the Chickahominy Power Station would emit 407 tons of nitrogen oxides and 211 tons of volatile organic compounds annually. These pollutants lead to an increase in ground level ozone. DEQ also claims that the plant could emit as much as 6,479,692 tons of CO2 equivalent every year. As we know from the UN IPCC report on climate change, the planet has a limited amount of time to reduce carbon output before causing severe, irreversible consequences. Virginia should be shutting down fossil fuel plants, not opening new ones. Why put the health and well-being of citizens of Charles City County at risk and contribute to climate change for a project that's not needed? Thank you for your time and consideration. I hope that you will do what is right for the Commonwealth of Virginia and deny the permit. Thank you.
Charles City County. And that we announce that the public comment we are soliciting is based on all of the items identified in 1307E, not just technical merit.
All right, we have a motion. Not sure I can restate it all, but it's a substitute motion, essentially to provide an additional 15-day public comment period for the DEQ to reach out to the African American community, in particular about all the issues, not just the technical ones. Is there a second to that motion?
I have a question.
Just a minute, Mr. Ferguson.
Before the second, I have a question.
What's your question?
Is it legal for our decision? We have a legal deadline for the decision today. Is this a legal?
That'll be part of the discussion on it. Yeah. Is there a second on that motion? Hearing none, the motion fails for want of a second. Are there discussion on the main motion?
Mr. Chairman, so
Ms. Robert.
The applicant made a commitment to the installation of additional monitoring equipment. So I feel like we need to have that reflected in here somehow, and I don't know how to do that, but I would appreciate a recommendation.
Ms.
I was...
Moreno, would you like to address that?
Yes, I agree with you, Ms. Rovner, and I was going to request that we see language from DEQ that we can consider and incorporate into our decision today. And I understand that we are looking at language that mirrors the language that we asked for in the BCS permit, and so we can take a short break so that we can look at that.
Okay, Ms. Moreno, as I may have indicated earlier, I don't know if I have or not, the applicant has agreed to that ambient monitoring requirement to be placed in the permit. It would be very similar, the language would be very similar to what was agreed to in the Buckingham permit. Yes, ma'am.
And you've heard me say before, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist.
and we would, it will go to the, pursuant to the motion and the votes of the board, it will go to the permit.
Well, I suggest then, because I have a couple of other requests on amendments, I suggest that someone type it up and hand it out to us so that we can look at it.
Or at least get it on
If we are,
so we can put it
or
up.
put it up so that we can look at it, or we can postpone the decision
Well,
until we have everything we need.
And we may take a couple of minutes to do that. I know that my folks and the applicant were discussing that at the end of lunch. I don't know if we have specific language right prepared, but we can certainly prepare that right now. Yes. And I'll defer to Mr. Thagard. The language would be very similar to what's in, not identical to what's in.
Right. What I'm thinking about procedure here. Do we need to cover these other issues that you have before, and then perhaps we could take a short stretch break while they prepare the document you're looking for?
I would be happy to request additional amendments to the language in the permit that we were given, and we can proceed with that while someone is typing up the language for the other provision.
And I have some additional requests too, so I'd like to consider those as
After,
well.
yeah.
Well, in that sense, to consider Ms. Kapoor's amendments, maybe we should take a break so we can hear what they are and discuss them with
Can we
the
handle
applicant.
these?
Handle your first ones first, that's fine, it's up to the chair.
And that way, when we go on break,
Sure.
we can come back and I'll
Sure.
look at the language for both and move the process forward.
Mr. Chair? I just was reminded, we should, I don't think this is a big deal, it's just procedural, but we should confirm that the board should confirm that amendments that are being recommended are what the board as a whole wants.
Right. I anticipate that these, that we would have an amendment to the main motion that would indicate we were going to make changes to the draft permit is what I anticipated. And whether that's in 3 different motions or one, I'm not at all sure at this point. Would it be better to get all this stuff out on the table first and then talk about it, or you want to talk about it at a break?
I think we, I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Chairman,
Mr. Hogan.
I'm confused, so I understand Ignacio's request for the amendment that she's proposed and which we've heard and discussed be written down and put up on the screen so we know.
I have other amendments.
Well, shouldn't we discuss them versus going off the record and getting, I'm confused.
That's what I'm suggesting, Mr.
Well, that was
Yeah.
just my question. We're not off the record. But
And what
we'll
I'll
be
say,
on the record.
the First Amendment on monitoring is obviously a substantive amendment that will make the permit stricter. I think the other amendments that Ms. Moreno is suggesting that have been agreed to by the applicant are much more of a, we're going to say, Scrivener nature. It's changing a couple of words. It's changing a few words here and there to make the permit clearer.
Okay, but I think with all due respect, I think the board's request for changes, it's not a question of whether the applicant agrees or not, it's the board's recommendation of what the changes on the permit should be. So I'd like to hear what they are.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to do, Mr. Hogan.
Yes, and I would welcome the opportunity to put them forward. So I've looked at the draft final permit with the track changes. That's the document that I'm going to refer to. And the section is the section on emission limit. And I will give you an example of language that is here. And it seems to be boilerplate in a number of places. So it says, and I'm looking now at paragraph 34D as an example. It says compliance with the VOC limits may be determined by demonstrating correlation of VOC emissions to CO emissions, and the may be determined by demonstrating, I think should be shall be determined by demonstrating, so that it's specific to the compliance language and that it's enforceable. Similar language appears in condition, and I should say I was talking about condition 34D earlier. The same appears in condition 36. And condition 36 is in page 16 and 17. But the language, again, the may be determined language appears on page 17 and should be replaced with the shall be language. If you need more from me, I'm just trying to shorten it so that we can get through it. But if you need me to read more of the full sentence, it's a similar sentence on compliance.
It's the same one on each condition, right?
Right.
I don't
Except
think
the differences are the condition paragraphs to which
I don't
the
think you
language.
need to reference that, it's just where you need may to turn to shall in
So-
these conditions.
Condition 37, which appears on page 17 to 18, the language at issue is on page 18. And again, may be considered, may be determined language should be shall be. Condition 38 on page 18, may be, again, should be shall be. Condition 39 on page 18, may be should be replaced with shall be. Condition 40 on pages 18 to 19, the language appears on page 19, may be should be shall be. And the final one is condition 41 on page 19, may be, should be, shall be. If you would please also ensure that the engineering analysis, as appropriate, is updated to reflect these changes. And we have already discussed that we will see language on the ambient air monitoring. I believe I've caught the changes. If any other similar paragraphs regarding compliance should appear in the document, I think we have an agreement, a meeting of the minds that we will be changing the may be to shall be.
I believe we do. We'll be getting that language. Staff is drafting it now. Cindy, do we need more from Ms. Moreno for the motion for those 1, 2, 3,
Those
4,
particular
5, 6,
changes
for
to the
those
may
7
shall?
changes?
No.
Okay.
We do need the board to agree to them, but we.
Yeah,
no,
we will
understood,
give-
understood.
yeah, but we'll give the board an opportunity to agree on it.
And it's the compliance language so that it's
Yes.
clear what compliance is expected and has been agreed to as part of the permit.
I mean, I think it's obvious, shall is a more restrictive term than may, and that's the purpose.